feel the tension here at Cape Canaveral.
Sending astronauts to space is a lot more fun than not sending astronauts to space.
T-minus 1 minute and counting.
And NASA should know.
Ignition.
For decades, the country that landed 6 crews of astronauts on the surface of the moon was the undisputed leader among spacefaring nations. But since 2011, after the last of the great American space shuttles flew, the U.S. has been completely unable to launch its own astronauts aboard its own rockets from its own soil.
One final time.
Instead, we have become a grounded nation, a humbled nation, reduced to hitching rides aboard Russia's Soyuz rocket at $80 million a seat. That all changes now. When a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket and Crew Dragon spacecraft leave the launch pad at Cape Canaveral carrying astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley while using 21st Century Free to focus on its longer-term dreams of sending astronauts to the moon and Mars. SpaceX is not the only company that will be part of this grand new enterprise. In position to fly soon is Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, which will tag team with SpaceX in getting crews to and from the International Space Station. It is altogether fitting that the upcoming launch will take place from Cape Canaveral's Pad 39A, the same pad from which Apollo 11 launched, carrying the first crew of humans to the surface of the moon. Just as a new era began then, so too is one beginning now. America, once grounded, is flying again. This afternoon, as we broadcast live from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm Jeffrey Kluger at the Time Magazine headquarters in New York. It has been 9 years since the final flight of the final space shuttle, which means it's been 9 years since the United States has had the capability to launch its own astronauts aboard its own rockets from its own soil. That's the longest America has been grounded since Alan Shepard became the first American in space 59 years ago this month. In that time, America launched 6 one-person Mercury missions, 10 two-person Gemini missions, 15 three-person Apollo missions, and 135 missions of the space shuttle. Every single one of those spacecraft had something in common that they do not have in common with today's flight. They were effectively designed by NASA and then built to order by a company it hired to do the job. The SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle that will take astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to space today will be the first privately designed and built rocket and spacecraft ever to fly human crew. History will be made by the mere fact that America is getting back into the space game, and more history will be made by the fact that that feat will be achieved in so different a way. We have what's known as an instantaneous launch window at Cape Canaveral today, and what that means is when this rocket takes off, this rocket can take off at 3:22. Period. It can't take off at 3:22 and a half. It can't take off at 3:22 and a third. That's because it has to rendezvous with the International Space Station, which is currently in an orbit with a 51.6 degree inclination to the equator. That's a pretty high inclination. At 250 miles of altitude, the spacecraft will launch from an entirely different orientation. Basically, that means 19 hours of chasing the space station before the crew catches up with it. It'll take only 12 minutes to get to space. It'll take a full day almost before the crew actually docks. Bad weather scrubbed the launch last week or on Wednesday, and there is a lot that can go wrong when it comes to the weather. NASA has a whole series of rules dictating when spacecraft will be grounded. You don't launch within 10 nautical miles of an attached thunderstorm. You don't launch within 3 nautical miles of thunderstorm debris clouds. You don't launch within 5 miles of disturbed weather. You don't launch within 10 miles of cumulus clouds. There's rule after rule after rule intended to keep the crews safe Now, this isn't to say that people haven't launched in dangerous conditions before. They have. The Apollo 12 crew, which launched in November of 1969, was actually struck by lightning barely a minute after it got off the pad, causing the entire electrical system to drop out. So that was a cautionary tale. The shuttle Challenger was, of course, America's great tragedy in 1986 when Challenger blew up on liftoff, and a great deal had to do with flying in cold weather when the O-rings that sealed the solid fuel in the solid fuel boosters on either side of the spacecraft became brittle and burned through, causing the explosion that claimed the crew's life. So weather is a critical issue in any launch, and it will be an issue in today's launch, as disappointing as it was on Wednesday when the spacecraft did not launch on time. We have to be prepared for possible disappointment again today. Safety is paramount in a launch like this, especially in a first test of a first spacecraft with a first new crew flying it. Behnken and Doug Hurley will be wearing an entirely new generation of spacesuits today. The suits that were actually designed in part by a Hollywood costume designer, Jose Fernandez, who designed some of the costumes for Batman versus Superman and the Avengers. Fernandez has told the press that Elon Musk, the head of SpaceX, said, quote, "When people put this spacesuit on, I want them to look better than they did without it, like a tuxedo." It is a one-piece suit. It effectively is a spacecraft all by itself, a self-contained life support system for the astronauts. They can slip into it easily, and it plugs directly into the life support systems of the suit. We now have some interesting footage from SpaceX describing how the suits were designed by the people who designed them.
I think one of the things that was important in the development of the suit was to make it easy to use, something that the crew just has to literally plug in when they sit down, and then the suit kind of takes care of itself from there. So the suit is really kind of one part of the bigger Dragon system. It's really part of the vehicle. So we think of it as kind of a suit-seat system. So the seat that the crew is in and the suit are in a lot of ways working together. And so it made sense that we were designing Dragon in-house to also design the suit.
Our spacesuit is completely designed in-house. It's built here in Hawthorne, California, in the same building as the rocket and the capsule. The spacesuit is custom-made for each crew member, and that is to optimize the fit for the crew member.
We definitely wanted to innovate, and we wanted it to look inspiring, but first and foremost, we wanted it to be safe and reliable. The spacesuit's primary purpose is to protect the crew in the unlikely event that the cabin were to depressurize. But the suit does a number of additional things. It provides cooling and communication to the crew inside of the suit, provides them hearing protection, and the outer layer of the suit is flame resistant, so it provides flame protection as well. When the crew gets in the capsule, they get in their seats and they plug the suit into the umbilical that's attached to the seat. And the umbilical is providing everything that the suit needs. So it provides the avionics or electronics for communications, it's providing the air to cool the suit, and then it also provides gas when needed to pressurize the suit. So it's really a single point that lets the suit do all the things that it needs to do. We designed the helmet in-house. The helmet serves a number of different functions. Obviously, it's protecting the crew's head and it's retaining gas like the rest of the suit, but it also houses the microphones as well as the valves that are regulating pressure in the suit. We had to design the gloves so that they would work with the touchscreen. So the gloves also had to do a number of other things like the rest of the suit. So all of those things had to come together within the glove. It'll be obviously really amazing to see Bob and Doug in their flight suits, and I think one of the things that's cool about the suit is it's not just a piece of hardware, it's not just a suit, it's a very personal thing. It's Bob's suit and it's Doug's suit. And so seeing the two of them in their suits using it in flight will be just a really amazing thing.
We're looking at a shot now inside the Launch Control Headquarters at Kennedy Space Center. There are actually three active mission controls operating today. There is the Launch Control Center here at KSC at the Kennedy Space Center. There is a Launch Control Center at the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. And of course, there is Mission Control in Houston, which will take over the flight the moment the engine bells clear the tower. As soon as the spacecraft is free of the gantry, it is basically Houston's bird to fly in cooperation with the crew in Hawthorne, California. What we're seeing now is the area around the crew walkout facility. Down that small gangway you see right in the back, this is the ramp and the doorway through which historic crews have passed before. The first, right here we have the first crew to go to the first moon landing. Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins. This is the Apollo 11 crew. This is the first crew to fly the space shuttle, Bob Crippen and John Young in 1981. This, tragically, is the Challenger crew at their walkout on the way to their flight. This, similarly, is the Columbia crew, the crew that was lost in 2003 when their spacecraft broke up on reentry. There have been many more successful missions coming out of these doorways over the course of decades than there have been these periodic tragedies. And we see Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. This is from last Wednesday during their walkout, wearing the new SpaceX spacesuits. They are climbing into a gull wing Tesla, and one of Elon Musk's companies, on their way to the launch pad. We are told that on that flight, on that drive to the pad last Wednesday, their audio track included AC/DC, the Blues Brothers, and the Star Spangled Banner to get them into a patriotic mood. The look of the pad right now is not enormously promising. The cloud cover obviously suggests that there could be some weather delays again today. Of course, a weather delay effectively means a scrub because, as we said, we have a 3:22 p.m. instantaneous launch window. It slams shut at 3:22, and at that point, the crew would have to wait again until tomorrow at 3 p.m. What we're seeing here is the swing arm attached to the Crew Dragon spacecraft. That swing arm runs from the gantry, that scaffolding that stands next to the rocket, and provides the crew access to the spacecraft itself. The large building we were just looking at was the vehicle assembly building, where the rocket is, as the name suggests, assembled and uprighted. Again, we are back on the pad here. The sight of the flag waving as briskly as it was in the breeze is not necessarily the best indicator of ideal weather, as is this cloud cover. But for now, all systems are still considered go, and the flight is still a go for 3:22 p.m. We are seeing now astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley walking through those same historic doors, getting ready to be transported to the pad. That's Bob Behnken on the right, Doug Hurley on the left. Doug is the overall spacecraft commander. Bob is the commander of the crew activities, particularly rendezvous and docking. You notice that in the space game, everybody gets the name commander in their title. Nobody wants to be seen as the subordinate. Back in the days of the Gemini program, they were called not pilot and co-pilot, but the command pilot and the pilot for the same reason. These are the astronauts, of course, saying goodbye to friends and family. You note that in this time of quarantine especially, there's no physical contact. This has been going on since long before the COVID era. There have been crew quarantines as far as long ago as the Gemini program. The crew climbing into this Tesla Gullwing will be attached to the seats through the same life support system that attaches them to the seats in the spacecraft. This allows oxygen and other life-sustaining systems to begin running through the suits. Think of each of these suits as a freestanding independent spacesuit. They are now getting primed for the suits to be able to sustain them once those helmets are closed. Basically, once those helmets are closed, the crew will have breathed fresh air for the last time until they return to Earth. It will be canned air on their way up, on their time aboard the station, and on their way down. They now begin a 9-mile ride out to the launch pad. One more goodbye to family and friends, and then off they go for that ride to the pad, which is close to the last time we will see them live until they return to Earth, anywhere from a month from now to 3 months from now. Typically the ride to the launch pad has taken place in a sort of RV, a recreational vehicle, a climate-controlled van in which the crew sat together. This caravan of Teslas is the kind of advertising money can't buy, but they are also sweet machines, and they are in keeping with the technology that's on display today, which is Elon Musk's two key companies. So it is only fitting that they will drive to a SpaceX space capsule spacecraft in a Tesla car. The one astronaut who has gone to the pad before in a the distance, the mileage to the launch pad is a function of the fact that what the astronauts will be flying aboard today is essentially a 76,000 gallons of highly explosive fuel in a 229-foot rocket. That is a very dangerous machine, and all flights are observed. The viewing stands are about 3.5 miles from the launch pad itself. The somewhat circuitous route that the crew has to travel via NASA roadways to get them out to the pad is about 9 miles, which is why we see this long motorcade. During the days of the Apollo program, the Saturn V rocket, had it exploded on the launch pad, would have produced the greatest non-nuclear explosion ever engineered by human beings. So there was a 3-mile sort of no-go footprint stomped around the rocket. There was an absolute absence of any other human life aside from the astronauts themselves and the key pad crew technicians and the hundreds of thousands of people who watched those launches watch from that 3-mile distance. Here we're seeing the motorcade approaching closer to the pad. Once it arrives, the crew will board the elevators that will take them up the gantry and to the spacecraft level at the top of the Falcon 9 rocket.
So that they can be on the the pointy end of the rocket, getting a chance to go up to space. It's just a momentous moment.
And they're listening to some tunes too, I heard, right, Lauren?
Yeah. There are at least 3 songs on their playlist that are super interesting. The first is AC/DC's Back in Black. You know that one.
Yeah, well, who doesn't?
Right. Another one that they're listening to is the elevator music from the Blues Brothers film, The Girl from Ipanema.
Oh,
Leland.
Okay.
Got another career.
That's enough.
Career
That's
number
enough.
3.
That's enough.
Right. NFL, astronaut, musician. Yep.
And, of course, they are also listening to the Star Spangled Banner, the Army French Horns version.
Now, we didn't have tunes in the Astrovan.
No?
And I know that the Tesla has a really kicking stereo system. Is that still the custom stereo system that's in the Tesla?
I haven't been in this one, so I don't know what they're rocking, but I'm sure it's pretty cool.
And again, just for some perspective, they left the operations and checkout building just a minute ago, and so it's about a 9-mile drive from there to the launch pad. It takes them around 20 minutes, kind of depends on how quickly they're trucking.
The other thing sometimes that you hear as you're in the convoy is the helicopter, the Huey helicopter flying overhead. And it's kind of also, you're thinking military, you're thinking really important things, and it's a moment that also kind of solidifies in you that, hey, something big is about to happen. And that whoop, 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 the sound of that Huey is just in your head, and it feels good that all these people are helping you get there safely.
Yeah, I think we heard that actually coming by
We did.
this building earlier because we were talking. And I was like, I hope that's what I think it is.
And it was pretty low because it was pretty loud.
You could feel it, too.
I did. I could feel it.
I took this drive yesterday in my rental car, and granted, it wasn't in a Model X, and I'm not an astronaut, but driving to 39A, that same route, and trying to put myself, imagine myself in that headspace, it was pretty awesome. I got to figure out how to get on Falcon 9.
Lauren, we're all astronauts. We're in space.
That is true.
You just got to get on the rocket.
Yeah, well, Leland, there's a big group of people that want you there.
I think we should, listen to them.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
I think we should.
Maybe we should make that a poll question.
Yeah. Well, we should all maybe go to space. What do you think?
I am on board. I mean, not literally right now, but I would like to be on board.
Lauren, would you go with us?
Absolutely.
Okay. Poll question.
have so many people watching online, sending well wishes to Bob and Doug. I mean, it started early this week as we were ramping up for Wednesday, and I feel like it's just been this buildup of momentum because, you know, we were following along Wednesday, and now we're all following along Saturday, and we have people watching from home that hopefully don't have to work today and can really tune into what's going on here.
And we, you know, as astronauts, truly appreciate all the support, all the social media feeds, and we think about, you know, our families. You know, we saw Megan and Karen there with their sons, wishing Doug and Bob well wishes and God.
Did you guys call me? The convoy is now approaching launch pad 39A, the historic pad from which Apollo 11 launched, from which nearly all of the lunar flights launched, and which is now leased to SpaceX for the launch of the Falcon 9 rocket and ultimately the Falcon Heavy rocket. We see well-wishers on the side of the road. We see the waving. We see the farewells. This is the critical moment when the crew will begin to take leave of the Earth, take leave of these ground-based vehicles, and become a part of the machine that's going to take them to space. When they arrive, there will be a short walk from the cars to the elevators that will take them up to the top of the gantry level, through the swing arm and over to their spacecraft, which will be their home for the next 20-some hours. About 24 hours from right now, the crew will be rendezvousing with the International Space Station. As we said before, it'll take them only 12 minutes to get to space, but it will take them 19 minutes to catch up with the ISS, the International Space Station. And when they board, they will be aboard the station for anywhere from a month to 3 months. We hear these helicopters overhead now. You can see these, the NASA logo on the back of the Teslas is the 1970s worm logo, it was called, because of its squiggly sort of sine wave design. The worm logo has been taken out of mothballs and is being put back to use, along with the more traditional NASA blue round logo that is nicknamed the meatball. On what we're looking at right here, toward the left, what that structure that looks like a water tower is exactly that. It is a water tower that dispenses hundreds of thousands of gallons of water to cool the launch pad shortly after the engines light. The larger structure in the middle is the gantry that holds the elevator and other support structures. And at the top of the gantry, off to the right, you see that swing arm, which will be the gangway that the astronauts will walk across in order to board the rocket.
Blast danger area. Now, before any pad technicians, engineers, or astronauts enter that area around the launch pad, the SpaceX and NASA teams do an internal go, no-go poll to make sure everything is clear.
This storied launch pad, which has been the beginning point for so many firsts, is the perfect backdrop for today's historic launch that marks a new first and a new era in human spaceflight.
And here's a view from our gantry near the Launch Complex 39A. We've got another view of the convoy going by here. If I had to count up all the cameras we have all over the place for this, I'd be here all day.
That's a beautiful shot right there, looking at the Kennedy Space Center and Merritt Island and all of the nature around us. It's a big buffer from 39A so that we can be safe and launch our rockets off to space safely.
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't realize this is a national wildlife refuge. I mean, I pass turtles on the way to my car every day.
Well, when we would run from the operations and checkout building, we'd have to watch out for snakes and for alligators, and so to be really careful about the wildlife.
We used to have one who lived at 39A.
Oh, really?
Yeah, an alligator.
Well, maybe we'll see him. We'll keep an eye out. Tweet at us if you see any.
Did you name him Worm?
Ooh, ahead of my time.
I don't know how an alligator would feel about being called Worm, Leland.
Yeah, well.
And we've got a ton of you following along on social media. Lynn says, as a fellow Missourian, we're so proud of Bob. Launch America, we will be watching from the Space Coast, cheering loud. And another comment, Godspeed and good luck, Astro Behnken and Astro Doug, hashtag Launch America. There you see the SpaceX horizontal integration facility. It's on the left of the screen now. We saw the front of it from the other angle. Or I'm sorry, no, there it is. I was getting my buildings mixed up, so it's on the right now.
Yeah,
Bigger building.
The other is the Falcon Support Building. It's where all of our offices are, and yes, you're correct.
Thank you for the correction.
There's our hangar. We process Falcon Heavy in there. There are other boosters in that hangar as well. And the rocket and Dragon that is on the pad right now was put together, or rather finally integrated inside of that hangar and then rolled out to that pad to go up vertical.
And there it is. That shot really gives you a sense of the scale of the Falcon 9 rocket. Those Teslas look teeny, teeny, tiny, making their way up there. And so as they make their way up to the pad, we're going to throw it over now to Hawthorne, where Jesse and Dan are watching the action. Hi, guys.
Another pretty key upgrade is the Dragon's new life support system. As you can imagine, flying humans requires keeping a habitable environment throughout the entire flight, and that means covering everything like providing breathing air, keeping the capsule at a safe pressure, keeping it free of contaminants, removing any carbon dioxide in the air, regulating the temperature, the humidity, all of these things, and also implementing that waste collection system, aka the toilet.
That sounds pretty important. The changes to Falcon 9 were small but extremely meaningful to meet NASA's requirements for safety for human spaceflight. And specifically, SpaceX had to prove a high degree of fault tolerance, meaning that small failures in the system would not lead to mission failure. Falcon 9 was already able to handle engine failure, but new emphasis was put on making sure that a failure throughout any phase of launch would not mean mission failure. And this goes all the way down to latches, control valves, electronics, wiring, and so much more.
All right, well, with the astronauts now on location at Pad 39A, we're going to swing it right back. Marie, Lauren, Leland, take us through the crew making their final steps towards the Dragon spacecraft.
Sure thing. So we are looking again at Launch Complex 39A. Just a few seconds ago, we saw the Tesla carrying Bob and Doug pull up to the launch pad. This is the site of so much history, you guys. This is where Apollo and Saturn V rockets that launched to the moon took astronauts from. I mean, this.
You stand there, you look there, you think about all the training you've done, all the preparation, and again, all the people that have helped you get there. And it's just a solemn, amazing moment for all of us.
And there's another amazing drone shot. Lauren, you explained this a little bit earlier about kind of how SpaceX brings the rocket and capsule vertical. Now that we see it, can you kind of explain that again for folks who maybe missed that?
Yes, of course. Dragon is actually processed a few miles down the road at Area 59, or Dragonland as we like to call it, We then put it on a truck and drive it all the way to the hangar where the rocket is. And so what will happen is we'll then break, we call it breakover, where the vehicle's up vertical, we'll turn it sideways because the rocket is being processed sideways or horizontal into the hangar, lift it, mate it to Falcon 9, and then roll up those hangar doors and essentially pull the vehicle in the transporter erector, which is the big white truss structure that you see there. All the fluid lines, electrical lines, and everything are connected to the vehicles via the TE, transporter erector. And they basically roll it up those rails. You can't really see them. You kind of see them in the screen, those rails. Roll the entire TE rocket Dragon assembly up to the very top of the pad, pin it into the pad systems, and then roll it up vertical.
And we are about T-minus 2 hours, 57 minutes, 44 seconds, and counting. In just a couple of minutes, we are expecting to hear a formal announcement that the crew is at the pad. Of course, we saw them pull up in the Teslas, and there they are. Looks like they've already gotten out of the car, and they are walking up to the elevator that will carry them all the way up to the 255-foot level, and then they'll have a couple of steps to get up to the level where the crew access arm is.
I have the AC/DC song in my head as I see them walking up.
You know what I was kind of jamming out to on my way in was ZZ Top, Sharp Dressed Man.
Oh, nice.
I was like, I don't know, that might be on my playlist if I were in there. There they are, taken in the sight, craning to see the top of the Falcon 9 rocket. It's 230 feet tall if you round up, and then Crew Dragon is another 27 feet from the bottom of the trunk to the top of the nose cone. So when you're out there in person, it's really hard to describe just how large it is.
Look at them getting excited. They're ready to get in the vehicle, get in the elevator, and make it to the top. There's some FOD he's picking up, foreign object debris.
Appreciate that. They're also wearing FOD covers on their shoes, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We want to make sure that they don't, track the inside of Dragon when they go in. And so right before they enter the vehicle, they'll remove the FOD covers off of their boots.
You take for granted, all just the little details like that, all of the thought and preparation that has to go into literally every single piece of this operation.
I love the makeover of Pad 39A with the sleek black with the white ticking and the lines, and it's a very futuristic look for this iconic launch pad. And to think what's been there before with Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, shuttle, and now the SpaceX Crew Dragon getting ready for a launch to the International Space Station. Rocket fuel still going through my veins.
And we feel so honored to be able to launch from here. Oh, here they are. That's a really fast elevator.
Yeah.
I know, it really zips. That took them up to 255 feet in just a matter of seconds.
They're removing their FOD covers.
Looks like they were just maybe checking something on his boot or leg.
And we should hear a call any moment that the crew has arrived at the pad as they make their way up the stairs, and they're headed to the crew access arm now. There's the worm again, popping.
You know it.
Meatball.
Don't worry, there's a meatball on Crew Dragon.
Those white arrows you see there are essentially illuminating the way for anyone who's up there to find their way to the escape baskets in the event of an emergency that would require them to get far away from the rocket and the pad.
And it's hard to tell from this angle, but there's actually a phone right here, and I can't tell if it's Bob or Doug that's using the phone right now. But Leland, can you explain the significance of that? It's the same phone that was there during the shuttle days.
Yeah, you get a chance to talk to maybe friends or family that you haven't had maybe couldn't come to the launch. In this case, it's quite a few people. But just to have that last moment to talk to someone before you get in the vehicle. It's a beautiful view.
And we're watching the crew when they're done using the phone there. We expect them to be making their way into the crew access arm. And coming up at about T-minus 2 hours and 35 minutes, the astronauts will ingress, or that's a word we use to describe climbing into Crew Dragon. And we saw Doug do it a couple minutes early on Wednesday. They were a little bit ahead of schedule, so that time could be a little bit flexible. But that's going to happen with the assistance of the suit techs, and they will get strapped into their seats. And so with that coming up, we're going to head over to Hawthorne for a preview of what's in store for the future in space travel. Jesse?
We've been listening to NASA's feed of narrating what is going on the swing arm, on the pad at the moment. They will eventually be throwing out to Hawthorne, California, the headquarters of SpaceX, to show some of what's going on out there. At the moment, we see Bob Behnken removing the foreign object debris shoes from his boots that prevent them from tracking any foreign object, any dirt into this pristine new spacecraft. It's sort of like taking off your galoshes before you come into the house. The astronauts are about to cross that swing arm and then enter the spacecraft. You can see over that NASA meatball logo on the wall what looks like a little bit of graffiti. That is where the astronauts signed their names, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, before boarding last Wednesday. This is the beginning of a new crew tradition in this new White Room. And this, by the end of SpaceX's at least 6 missions to the ISS, that wall is going to be pretty full of signatures. You saw something similar in the walkout scenes when they were leaving through the double doors during the walkout to the vans that take the astronauts to the launch pad. You could notice over the doors dozens and dozens of crew stickers, crew patches, each one indicating a crew, whether from the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, or shuttle eras, that have walked through those doors and gone to the launch pads. This marks a new tradition, autographing the walls of the White Room before boarding the spacecraft. The spacecraft they're getting into now, the Dragon, it's a young machine. It's a machine that's carrying humans for the first time, but it has a pretty robust history. There have been 22 Dragon launches so far, with 21 visits to the International Space Station. The spacecraft is capable of seating up to 7 people, which was the capacity and the maximum capacity of the much larger shuttle. It stands almost 27 feet tall and 13 feet wide. That's about the same width as the Apollo crew vehicle, but it's 2.5 times the height and the habitable capacity that the Apollo had. It is maneuvered in space by 16 Draco thrusters. Those are the thrusters that allow it to change its orientation and attitude in space. On the way back down, it descends under the power of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 main parachutes, as you can see in the footage here. It is a pretty adaptable system. We see it right now configured for just 2 astronauts, but again, it can hold as many as 7. The Falcon 9 rocket, on top of which the Dragon will launch today, stands 229 feet tall. It's fueled by 9 Merlin engines. SpaceX has an interesting technique for building rockets. Basically, they go by the more is more philosophy. Their very first rocket, the Falcon, had a single Merlin engine. The Falcon 9, as the name suggests, has 9 engines. The Falcon Heavy, which is one of the heaviest lift rockets flying today, has 3 clusters of 9 or 27 Merlin engines. Each one of those engines is capable of producing 125,000 pounds of thrust. So for this rocket that'll be launching today, it will be exerting the equivalent of 1,125,000 pounds of thrust over all It runs on RP-1 rocket fuel, which sounds very fancy, but is in fact simply a highly technical way of saying refined kerosene. And it also uses liquid oxygen as the oxidizer. This will be the 84th launch of a Falcon 9 rocket since the very first launch on June 4th, 2010. And one great innovation of the SpaceX design system is that first stage is not expendable. The first stage of the rocket can be reused when it is jettisoned from the rest of the spacecraft after its fuel has been spent. It doesn't simply tumble into the ocean. Instead, it lands on a barge in the ocean to be refurbished and used again. So far, there have been 44 successful landings of a Falcon first stage on an ocean barge, and 31 of those stages have been refurbished and reflown. This is one way of keeping costs down and keeping the production lines moving quickly. Today's launch is the result of more than 10 years of development of the Commercial Crew Program. The initial idea was to allow NASA simply to purchase services of private companies that would fly crew to and from the International Space Station, freeing the space agency up to focus on its longer-term ambitions to explore deeper space, going to the moon, going then later on to Mars. Here we're seeing when the first commercial crew announcements were made, the crews were introduced. There are two companies that will be flying crews to and from the International Space Station. SpaceX, and unmentioned so far today, but very much in the game, is Boeing, which will be flying its Starliner spacecraft. It has one more uncrewed test sometime in the next 2 or 3 months, and then it has another crewed test sometime early in 2021. The astronauts and SpaceX have been through a lot of stages to get to this point. They successfully flew a pad abort test, which is what we're seeing right here. A test of the launch escape system that pulls the capsule away from a booster that may be flying awry or may be about to explode. The Gemini, old Gemini spacecraft used ejection seats. The Apollo and Mercury spacecraft used something very much like this. What you're seeing here is what would happen if a rocket began to blow up and the SpaceX crew compartment or the Dragon crew compartment would simply separate and then descend into the Atlantic safely for a quick recovery. This was one of their bigger successes, this pad abort test. They similarly flew a launch abort test in which they actually deliberately destroyed a Falcon 9 on the way up in order to test whether the spacecraft could safely get away from a rocket that was in danger of exploding. The company did ace that test as well. The escape system was proven. It showed that the astronauts could indeed be pulled safely away from an exploding vehicle. We see that happening now. That small dot toward the center of your screen is the crew compartment escaping. Now, not all has gone well. This explosion right here was deliberate. That was supposed to simulate a rocket that had gone awry. Not all has gone well. There have been some stumbles. During one of the pad abort tests in 2019, the spacecraft itself exploded on the launch pad, which is a very bad sign. And there was no denying the fact that that was a setback. Here is another setback from 2016 when one of the rockets was being fueled on the launch pad and exploded. We just saw that's a crash of one of the first stages as it was trying to land on a barge, failing to land. There were no injuries in any of these cases, fortunately. And as recently as yesterday in Boca Chica, Texas, where the SpaceX Starship is being designed, the 120-foot tall stainless steel rocket that Elon Musk hopes to use to get to the moon and then later on to Mars, there was a static fire test on the launch pad just yesterday, and there was another explosion. It was a poorly timed accident one day before Elon Musk and SpaceX are set to send astronauts to space. It does not necessarily inspire confidence, but these are two very different spacecraft. Starship, which exploded yesterday, is very much an in-development prototype spacecraft that is nowhere near ready to carry humans. The Falcon 9 is a highly proven vehicle with its 88 launches and its overall highly successful safety rating. So what we're seeing today is the result of multiple successes and a handful of failures, and that basically is how rocket engineering is done.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear.
Core, loud and clear. Teachers comm check complete. Stand by with comm checks with MD and LD in the launch configuration.
Dragon, MD on countdown 1. Com check.
SpaceX, Jason, loud and clear.
Copy, loud and clear. Glad to have you guys on board. Stand by for com check on Dragon to ground. Dragon, MD, Dragon to ground, com check.
MD Dragon, loud and clear.
MD, loud and clear. Stand by for com checks with LD.
Dragon, launch director on countdown 1, com check.
Good afternoon, Mike. Loud and clear.
I have you the same, and good afternoon. Stand by for my com check on Dragon to ground. Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground, com check.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear.
I have you the same. Back to core.
Dragon SpaceX, this concludes our launch configuration comm checks. Report when ready for seat rotation per section 2 of 4.100.
Dragon, I'll put that in work.
Copy.
All right, so all those communications checks were done successfully, and you could even see, and it's so cool when we get these views right inside the cabin.
SpaceX Dragon in 2.2, we are ready for seat rotation.
Copy. We will report when initiating.
But you could see Doug Hurley using his right hand. He has the talk button built into the seat itself. So just, again, showing you all of the different systems, how the suit is integrated into the seat, and it's all just one big circle for this whole spacecraft. So really cool to see those comm checks live. Jessica, thank you so much for walking us through some of the really cool updates, the upgrades. Did you have any other cool stuff besides?
Let's see. So I don't know if you guys can see, but we have the Dragon clean room here. And one of the coolest things is it is right on the main floor of our main building. So thousands of employees walk by here all the time and get to see Dragon in its final processing before it goes to the Cape. On Wednesday, the Crew 1 capsule was in here. It looked almost done. It looks a little empty right now, but that's because that capsule went off into our separate test facility for its final propulsion checks. So we do leak checks and things there, and we do that in a separate facility just because it's
We've been looking at Bob and Doug Hurley inside the spacecraft. Let's get to know these two gentlemen a little bit. Bob Behnken is listed as the Joint Operations Commander for the mission. What that means is he's in charge of the delicate choreography of rendezvousing and docking and other exercises as the spacecraft approaches the International Space Station tomorrow. That's a very delicate system. A small 26-foot spacecraft is approaching a great flying space liner the size of a football field, and mating those two vehicles is a complicated process. Bob was first selected to be an astronaut in 2000. He has flown 2 space shuttle missions, STS-123 in March of 2008 and STS-130 in February of 2010. He is a veteran of no fewer than half a dozen spacewalks, 3 on each mission. He was born in St. Anne, Missouri. He has a bachelor's degree in physics and a master's in engineering from no less a place than Caltech, and did serve for a time as a U.S. Air Force flight test engineer. Doug Hurley is the commander of the spacecraft. He, too, was selected as an astronaut in the incoming class of 2000. He was born in Endicott, New York. He has a bachelor's in civil engineering from Tulane and graduated as into the U.S. Naval Pilot Test School in Maryland. He was a fighter pilot and test pilot in the Marine Corps. He flew on, like Bob, he's been on 2 shuttle flights, STS-127 in 2009 and fittingly STS-135 in July 11th, the very last shuttle flight after 30 years of shuttle missions. Both of these astronauts get a commander designation, commander for mission operations and commander for the spacecraft itself. It is one more sign of the fact that as collaborative and as collegial a business as flying in space is, these are competitive men and women, and nobody likes to be flying necessarily under the command of someone else. So they both get a little bit of taste of command. And we have some NASA deeper profiles that we can throw to showing you a little bit more about the astronauts talking about themselves and their own experiences.
Hi, I'm Bob Behnken. I am the Joint Operations Mission Commander for NASA's SpaceX Demo 2 mission. So Doug, Hurley, and I are about to take NASA's SpaceX Demo 2 mission to the International Space Station. During that mission, we'll perform some checkouts, everything from a response to a fire on board to flying close to the International Space Station manually. We'll make sure all those systems are working during the test flight so that the future missions will have them available even if they don't plan to utilize them. We're hopeful that future crews on, Dragon vehicles headed to, NASA space stations aren't cursing our names because we accepted some feature that was complicated and hard to train and then in the end hard to operate. In the Air Force environment, flight test environment, there's always a balance of managing risk as you go forward to execute a test point and figuring out a way to collect the data and do that in the calm, cool, collected kind of test environment with experienced folks before a pilot ends up someplace a little bit more complicated with a lot less resources. My role for a space mission is very much the same. My career at NASA has kind of spanned a couple of decades at this point. I arrived with the class of 2000, went through the training program, primarily focused on the space shuttle and the International Space Station, learning those systems through the assembly process, which was a little bit like where we were with Dragon in the early days, because space station kept changing and you had to stay up with it. After that, I was eventually assigned to a series of kind of training activities, both as a long-duration crew member and then flip-flopped over and flew a couple of shuttle missions, both on Endeavour. After that, I came back and kind of worked up the leadership chain through station operations, deputy chief, and then chief of the astronaut office. One of my goals was to try to get as many astronauts off to Kazakhstan so they would appreciate the day when we got to launch again from the Florida coast. Probably 2 things that jump out to me as kind of big wins. One is associated with having a high enough fidelity from a training perspective. Both Doug and I can sit in a capsule, we can put on suits, and we can go through a situation or a scenario where the suits are going to inflate to try to protect us from whatever situation is developing on board the vehicle. And I think one of our biggest accomplishments was a tool to be able to plan our own way out of orbit back to Earth. And we had to come up with a way that didn't break the software allocation that was out there. And we just had the big picture of, okay, how does the crew just get home if they end up in this situation? How does the crew get home if they end up in this situation? When they were able to flip that switch and not count how many failures it took to get there, but accept that let's figure out the easiest way to provide that capability, and they got on board with it. That was the aha moment. You don't necessarily have to save the mission with the crew, but you need to save the crew with the crew is kind of the mindset that we've put out there. It's really kind of designed that launch day is kind of relaxed. So we'll get up, have a little bit of exercise probably, or breakfast and then some exercise, be able to do some last minute phone calls. We'll probably have lunch, review, weather briefing of some sort to understand what our weather's going to look like. We'll hear anything associated with the vehicle, kind of technical detail wise. We'll get a little bit of an early read on that before the formal process of getting the suit on and then heading out to the launch pad. For me, having launched a couple times on vehicles, the second time was definitely different than the first time in terms of relaxation associated with the mission. You're doing that for the first time, you can feel a little bit guilty of, hey, should I study one more thing, or is there one more piece of information I should get? So that's definitely different between where I was on my first flight and where I'm at right now. On a deeply personal level, I'm really excited that my son is going to get a chance to see me launch into space. Being an astronaut has been a little bit of an abstraction thing for him because he's seen me do it in old videos, but he hasn't seen me do it for real. I think it's important for the U.S. to continue to have these exciting things out there from a technical, engineering, science, challenge perspective, because it motivated me to go into this sort of a career, and I know that it motivates other children in. And so I'm excited to bring it back to the Florida coast, or be a part of bringing it back. I'm just one piece of a multi-thousand member team that's going to hopefully pull this off in short order. It's inspiring to me, and I'm just excited to be a part of it.
What's going on in that white room? The portion of the swing arm that connects to the spacecraft that we can see, the sort of accordion-like black structure, that is the white room where the crew technicians, the pad technicians, are helping the astronauts into the spacecraft. What's going on behind that enclosure right now is the closeout. This is the point at which the spacecraft is sealed. While the astronauts have not yet physically left the planet, they have effectively atmospherically left the planet. They are now breathing life support air. They're being sustained by the systems aboard, the environmental control systems aboard the spacecraft. They are now, in some ways, in space. This is the way they will be living for the next 1 to 3 months aboard the International Space Station. They are now, in a sense, integrated with their spacecraft. They are part of the machine. The door is closed. There is no Florida air filling their spacecraft any longer. This is all the life support system of their suits, of their seats, which are integrated into the suits, and of the Dragon 9, or of the Crew Dragon spacecraft itself, keeping the crew alive. They are now very much in the process of leave-taking. Having checked in on the doings on the capsule, let's meet our second astronaut aboard, Doug Hurley, the commander of the spacecraft itself.
Hi, my name is Doug Hurley, and I'm the spacecraft commander for the Demo 2 mission to the International Space Station. This mission is the crewed test flight for the SpaceX Crew Dragon. So every portion of the flight, this will be the first time the Crew Dragon has had a crew on board. And so there's a myriad of objectives we want to achieve. Obviously, the first part is to launch the rendezvous and docking phase. And then we'll spend some time on board space station and do some docked activities with the vehicle. And then at some point, 30 to 90 days later, we will undock and do an entry and a landing in the Atlantic off the coast of Florida. It's a story. On STS-127, which was my first flight, I think we scrubbed on the order of 6 times over the course of about a month. It was literally Groundhog Day trying to get into space. And of course, it's your first flight, so you really, really want to go. We just had technical challenges for the first 2 or 3 launch attempts, and then had to scrub for weather a number of times before we finally got to go. That's why you got to go to the pad, you got to get in the vehicle, because you never know when the weather's going to clear. It's not the best of stories, but I think back so fondly on that mission. We worked really hard for 16 days, but it was a great mission once we got airborne. We first got down to Kennedy, we got every checklist out, and every responsibility that each one of us had, we kind of almost tabletopped it for the first couple days. And you see that in sports teams. You see the coaches and players that spend that extra time after practice and at night reviewing film and going over films of the other teams. I think that's what you need to do in a space flight, is you need to know what you're going to do almost instinctively, if not completely by heart, and then go from there. And I think it sets you up for success. With the shuttle, you were on your back for almost 4 hours waiting to launch. So part of it was just, let's get this over with and get going. But then when the engine's light, you know you are going, and you know you're going somewhere pretty fast. And you go from, in the case of the shuttle, you go from 3 Gs to 0 Gs instantaneously, and things start floating. And I remember distinctly just thinking, what just happened? Because 8.5 minutes ago I was on Earth, and now I'm in space. And obviously with Falcon 9 and Dragon, this will be the first time humans have ridden on the Falcon 9, even though it's flown many, many times. You tend to pull more Gs. The first stage is pretty similar. Like shuttle, we had about a 2.5 minute first stage. The difference is going to be with Falcon 9, the engines, you know, you separate from that part of the rocket with the engines the first stage, and so you get kind of a weightlessness there for, or a lack of acceleration there for a split second or two. So that part of it is going to be distinctly different. We could experience somewhere on the order of 4+ Gs, whereas shuttle, we were limited to just 3 Gs. I think our concentration has mostly been on, you know, the profile, the crew vehicle interface, you know, just how the Dragon will work for crews going forward. That's why we're going to do this flight now, is to prove out what we think it will do. Ideally, it will do exactly what we expect it to do. The first simulator where we integrated the Hawthorne mission control team and the Houston mission control team was a huge moment, to be able to just have the entire integrated team that's going to support us getting to and from space station, talking together, working through the challenges. I think that was probably for me the first big highlight, and that wasn't that long ago. It overwhelms you to think about how many people have in some way, shape, or form touched this program and this vehicle to get us to this point. You know, we obviously in a lot of ways are the lucky ones that get to fly it, but we certainly not for 1 second take for granted the amount of effort that so many other people had to put into this to make it successful. And you know, we'll do our part to make it successful and to get back here and celebrate with everybody in a few short months. Very excited. Yeah, very excited.
So today is as much about Bob and Doug and the future of the space program as it is a bit of an elegiac look back at the phase we just left behind, and that phase ended with the final flight of Atlantis. Let's take a look at Atlantis and how it got prepared for that final flight that ended the 135 flight space shuttle program. The spacecraft hatch has now been officially closed. We will get back to that Atlantis footage in a moment. You can see the White Room team sealing the hatch. It is a very painstaking process. This is the doorway that separates the astronauts from the void once they get to space, so you want no mistakes with this. Hatches have a long history in NASA. They have a very dark history with a hatch that would not open during the Apollo 1 fire. And so if there's any part of the spacecraft that has gotten special attention since that tragedy in 1967, it is the hatch, the doorway that separates the astronauts from their internal world to the external world. This crew, this White Room crew, will not leave this spacecraft until they are absolutely assured that the hatch is sealed and closed and that it is crew-worthy and flight-worthy. And it's starting to look as if they are satisfied with these preparations and will momentarily be backing away and allowing that swing arm to move back. And now let's take a look at that look at the final flight of the shuttle Atlantis and how it got ready for that closeout voyage. The final mission for America's space shuttle fleet began with the shuttle Atlantis in this processing hangar. The ship was there for weeks to check and recheck its millions of parts, making sure the very last shuttle was ready to haul 14 tons of food, equipment, and supplies to the International Space Station. Once Atlantis was announced fit to fly, the next step in this final trip was the procedure known as rollover. That began with Atlantis being towed from its processing hangar to the vehicle assembly building, following a path well worn by 134 other shuttle missions over 30 years of flying. 3 photographers documented this process with time-lapse pictures shot over the course of 4 days. In all, 15 cameras captured 120,000 images. Once inside the vehicle assembly building, the country's largest building by volume east of the Mississippi, Atlantis was lifted by a halter crane. It was then attached to its giant solid fuel boosters and to its 15-story liquid fuel tank. When that was completed, the shuttle emerged to begin its 6-hour slow crawl to the launch pad. shuttle workers gathered by the hundreds to witness the space shuttle's final rollout, and with good and sentimental reason. 355 humans flew over the course of 135 shuttle missions from 1981 through 2011. The shuttle's secret was in some ways its very lack of glamour. It was a reusable workhorse ship that got humans and equipment to and from space, and in so doing helped ensure America's future off the planet. This launch of 2 astronauts aboard a SpaceX rocket, the first such launch from American soil since Atlantis' flight, is the next big step in that future. Once again, we are getting a look at the swing arm that will soon be pulling away from the spacecraft, leaving Bob and Doug there alone at the top of the rocket with their support team finally separated from them. You can see here that there's a bit of a rain squall. It's a little bit hard to make out the rainfall itself, but it's not at all hard to make out the gray skies, so there could be a few problems there. As you can see, we're back in the White Room now, and this hatch is getting still more attention, although it's looking like these touchpads are being used to check off those final milestones, and it looks like this crew is getting ready to leave the White Room at long last and let that swing arm come back. While we're waiting for the swing arm to come back, a big part of the future of the space program obviously does involve Elon Musk, and I had an opportunity to talk to him sometime last year. Let's see a little bit of that conversation we had at the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California.
I think Apollo 11 landing on the moon was probably the most inspiring thing in history. Arguably the most inspiring thing. Just the level of inspiration that provided to the people of Earth was incredible. And it certainly inspired me. I kept expecting that we would continue beyond Apollo 11, that we would have a base on the moon, that we would be sending people to Mars. But the United States has been without the ability to send people to low Earth orbit since 2011 when the shuttle retired. We need to advance space beyond what has been done before, and that we need to send people to Mars. Expand our horizons, to do more.
In 2002, Elon Musk founded SpaceX,
We have liftoff.
breaking the stranglehold that governments had had as the exclusive providers for access to space.
Second stage ignition confirmed.
When Musk couldn't lease facilities to launch his rockets from the continental United States, he moved a team of engineers to a small atoll in the Marshall Islands. Despite early failures, SpaceX eventually found success. In 2010, it became the first non-governmental organization to launch, orbit, and successfully recover a spacecraft. And in 2011, it was awarded its first NASA contract as part of the Commercial Crew program.
I thought starting SpaceX would be 90% likely to fail. The cost of access to space was just too high. Even if we doubled NASA's budget, unless NASA had good options for rocket contractors, they would still not make progress. So I actually just funded the whole company in the beginning myself, not because I thought it would turn out well, but because I thought it would fail.
Elon Musk's sheer brazenness, his willingness to break old molds and make bold promises, has captivated space fans. giving the company and its founders something of the popular following once enjoyed by Steve Jobs and Apple. And it's not just image. The company does things differently, re-landing spent first stages on ocean barges, building its massive stainless steel Starship rocket, adding technological prowess to its popular sizzle.
The holy grail of access to space is a fully reusable orbital rocket. We cannot have a base on the moon. We cannot have a city on Mars. We cannot become a multi-planet species without full and rapid reusability. And we've made significant progress towards reusability with the reuse of the Falcon 9 boost stage. That's somewhere around 2/3 of the cost of launch, maybe 70%. And we've just recently been successful in catching the fairing, the nose cone of the rocket. And that is a crazy exercise with a boat that's basically a giant catcher's mitt. And the boat adjusts course automatically, and the two just, maneuver to touch each other.
While SpaceX is pushing the limits of rocket technology, it has also had some setbacks. A Crew Dragon spacecraft exploded during a test in 2019. The upcoming launch of a crew to the International Space Station is years behind schedule.
Any new development process, especially for something as complicated as a spaceship, that can safely fly crew, the important focus for NASA is doing it safely, doing it right. You learn many times the most from the failures and the tests that don't go the way that you expect them to. So the incident with the Crew Dragon last year, testing the escape system on the ground, having an anomaly, and then going back and looking through the design, making sure that we fully understood everything that happened and really, upgraded the design to make sure that something like that could never happen again and be as safe as possible from beginning to end. And it really culminated in that successful in-flight abort test earlier this year.
And there you just saw the trunk jettison again, some really loud cheers.
But the Falcon 9 that will launch this week is now considered a reliable machine with a proven record. That does not say there's no risk. The rocket will use the so-called load and go approach before launch, with the fuel tanks being filled after the astronauts have boarded the spacecraft. This improves rocket performance given the dense, supercooled fuel that's used, but it's never been tried before with astronauts aboard, and there will be some tense moments leading up to the launch.
The NASA team really took, a strong look at all of the pros and cons of all the different ways to do that timing between crew integration and ingress and vehicle loading and launch, and they really came together and determined that this was the right, best approach to go do for this vehicle.
SpaceX represents a big part of NASA's future, but it also has a lyrical link to the past. One of the sweetest spots in all the world for people who love space is pad 39A.
It's the best pad.
Best pad. I mean, Apollo 11 left from there.
Yeah.
Virtually all of the lunar landing and orbital missions left from there. And
I can't believe we get to use this pad.
And that's my question.
An insane honor.
What does that feel like? That is SpaceX's leased pad now.
We're not worthy.
While this launch will be historic, Musk has his eyes on the future too, already building a new rocket dubbed Starship, capable of taking humans to the moon and even Mars. This flight marks an important first step toward those grander journeys to come. We're getting a live shot here of the scene at Cape Canaveral, and if you are not seeing the launch pad clearly, that's because the weather conditions have conspired once again against this launch. Now we are still 2 hours out from launch, close to 2 hours, 1 minute, 58 and 14 seconds. And Florida weather can be fickle stuff. It could clear and cloud up and clear and cloud up again. couple of times in the next 2 hours. But at the moment, these are not conditions in which any prudent flight director would launch a spacecraft. What we're hearing from Times reporters on the ground is the word torrential to describe the downpour. So at the moment, so far there's no launch, there's no countdown hold. There can't be a countdown hold today because there is an instantaneous launch window at 3:22. So the clock will keep running, and the spacecraft, the rocket, either will or will not get off the ground at 3:22 p.m. At the moment, if this weather holds, it will not get off the pad. But once again, we rely on the very volatility and fickleness of Florida weather to perhaps clear up for us. In the meantime, that is the very short-term future of space exploration, what's going to happen in the next 2 hours. Let's take a look at something of the longer view, what the future of space exploration is going to look like after this flight does get off the ground at some point in the next, over the course of the next couple of years and decades. Even as NASA and the rest of the world await this week's launch of 2 astronauts to the International Space Station aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, the space agency itself has its eyes trained deeper into space, much deeper. The entire purpose of the Commercial Crew program was not just to open up space travel to the private sector, it was also to allow the agency to devote its human exploration energy to returning astronauts to the surface of the moon, and later, to Mars.
We're going to Mars, and in order to go to Mars, we have to use the moon as a proving ground. We need to get to Mars. That's our driving ambition as an agency and as humanity. As far as exploration, this has been on the minds of many people for generations and generations.
The new lunar program, named Artemis, after the sister of Apollo, aims to have the first woman and the next man on the surface of the moon no later than 2024. The plan is an ambitious one, but with a lot of work and a few breaks, the goal can be met. Long in development and now nearing completion is the rocket that will be used for the missions, NASA's prosaically named Space Launch System, or SLS, the 21st century's answer to the 20th century's Saturn V. Initial versions of the SLS will stand taller than a 32-story building. Later iterations will top out at 38 stories. Either one will be more than capable of setting crews off on a deep space journey.
The SLS rocket, the biggest rocket that's ever been built in history, taller than the Statue of Liberty. It's on the 5-yard line, and we're going to punch it into the end zone. If we're going to land in 2024, which we're going to do, the key is going to be SLS.
Also nearly ready for flight is the Orion crew vehicle, an exceedingly souped-up version of the old Apollo spacecraft, able to carry as many as 6 crew members compared to Apollo's 3. The first flight could take place as soon as 2021.
Welcome inside the Orion trainer. Right now, I'd say crew members are over here 2 or 3 days out of the week doing different tests.
One of the neatest things about the Orion spacecraft in general is that this is designed to take us to Mars. And so this spacecraft is designed to be operated autonomously by the crew. So when we are on our way out to Mars, there's going to be minutes of comm delay back to Houston. And we have to make all the decisions in here. It's really amazing. It's an impressive vehicle.
In order to land on the moon, NASA needs a new lunar lander. And on April 30th, the space agency selected 3 companies, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Dynetics, to begin the work of developing one. The early blueprints from all of the companies are promising, and the competition will be bracing, with only one company emerging as the final builder. NASA's goal for this generation of lunar landings is not to repeat the short visits of the Apollo missions, the so-called flags and footprints model, but rather to go to the moon to stay.
I don't want to give any specific dates. I don't want to make any announcements, but if we're going to land in 2024, we've got to select quickly. The goal is to lead a coalition of nations to have a sustainable presence at the moon with more access to more parts of the moon than ever before. We learned that there's hundreds of millions of tons of water ice at the south pole of the moon. What does that mean? Water ice represents air to breathe, it represents water to drink, it represents rocket fuel. We are going to Mars. The moon is a waypoint. It's the place where we learn how to live and work. We learn how to make it sustainable.
Only by learning how to live off the land in a long-term encampment just a 3-day flight from home can America be sure it's ready to take the next great step to send astronauts to Mars. After half a century of staying close to home in low Earth orbit, human beings will once again look deeper into space and will follow to the places that cosmic gaze leads them. Well, as you can see from this shot, the weather has only deteriorated further. There is no word yet from NASA on whether this flight would scrub early if the weather conditions seemed absolutely hopeless, or whether they will continue counting down straight to that 3:22 p.m. mark. One of the determining factors will be the load and go fuel. They have not yet begun fueling this rocket. That's a complicated process. It's entirely possible that if the weather continues to deteriorate, they'll decide it's not worth even going through that, and the launch would get scrubbed early and the crew would emerge early. But the betting here and the betting in Canaveral at the moment is no matter what, we will go right up to that 3:22 p.m. mark, and the spacecraft either will or will not lift off. Whatever happens today on the launch pad, what happened before the crew got to the launch pad is part of a long history of spaceflight traditions. Astronauts are not necessarily superstitious by nature, but they are creatures of habit. The first big moment in any astronaut's day has always been the pre-flight breakfast, typically steak and eggs. That was Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins having their pre-flight breakfast pre-Apollo 11. What we saw a moment ago was the traditional tree planting at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where each new astronaut who goes aloft will plant a tree. The plush toy we saw floating in the spacecraft a moment earlier is another tradition. Astronauts will often bring along a toy of some kind, not simply as a comfort object, but so they have something that will float when they reach zero G. Remember, they're strapped into their seats. They can't float out. So when you see the plush toy beginning to fly, you know that you are in orbit. Here we see Bob and Doug continuing with their other tradition, the new tradition of signing the walls of the White Room before they take off. And one of the oldest traditions, and perhaps one of the least dignified of the traditions, is one begun by Yuri Gagarin, the first human being in space. On his way to the launch pad, he realized that he must have consumed a little bit too much coffee on his way to the pad, so he stepped out of the van and opened his spacesuit and relieved himself against the tire of the van, taking him to the launch pad. Ever since then, astronauts and cosmonauts leaving from the Baikonur Cosmodrome will stop on their way to the pad and have a similar self-relieving ceremony. It's not the most dignified, but it is one of the most enduring of spaceflight traditions. I am being told that we have one small error to correct here. Bob and Doug signing the wall of the White Room is not a new tradition. This, in fact, has been going on for decades of flights, including the space shuttle and other crews before them. This is simply the continuation of a long-standing tradition, this time, though, in a brand new White Room with a brand new spacecraft. Pad 39A, the launch pad from which the astronauts will leave for space today, if the weather permits, is one of the most historic spots in the history of the space program. Elon Musk, as you saw earlier, sees it almost as hallowed ground, as do a lot of people. It is the launch pad from which virtually all of the Apollo lunar missions flew, as well as all 135 of the shuttle missions. Let's take a look at the history of Pad 39A and how it came to be.
We're go, same type, we're go. Altitude, velocity, light.
Why, some say the moon. Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle.
Start. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0. And liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis. On the shoulders of the space shuttle, America will continue the dream.
Roger roll, Atlantis.
Let's take a look back at some of the history that came before today. The Great Apollo program, of course, was the one that took human beings to the moon. There were 11 Apollo launches from Apollo 7 to Apollo 17, and 9 of them went to the lunar surface, or went to at least around the moon and then on to the lunar surface. Some of the great men and women of space history worked in that room. Gene Kranz, Glenn Lunny, Chris Kraft, all of the giants of the space program. The rockets that launched from Pad 39A during the Apollo program were the largest rockets ever built. If you had been able to harness the power of that rocket taking off, it would have been the equivalent of running every river in America through a single hydroelectric turbine at the same moment. That was the kind of energy that was used to get these rockets off the ground and into deep space. The technology used was, of course, primitive by today's standards. This was slide rule technology, this was pencil technology, this was mental math technology, and yet it got these spacecraft to the lunar surface. The touchdown on the moon that was achieved here on Apollo 11 on July 20th, 1969, was the culmination of a promise President Kennedy made 8 years earlier, when he simply declared that we choose to go to the moon. We don't have to go to the moon. We choose to do this because we are a spacefaring people. We are a questing people. We are people who look at what's on one mountain and decide we have to get to the other mountain. We are people who look at one coast of an ocean and decide we have to get to the other side of that ocean in order to explore. It all began with these 7 men, the original Mercury astronauts. 6 of the 7 flew. 1 didn't because of an early heart murmur. What they went through to be qualified was not easy stuff. From the Mercury program, the one-man spacecraft, the very first launch was right here. You see it on a Redstone rocket. It was a little pop gun suborbital flight. It's a tiny rocket this